people found guilty of crimes have tried to bring this argument into the courtroom. There was a Jeffrey Landrigan who I think committed murder following an escape from prison and was sentenced to death. Who was he, and was he successful?
He wasn't successful, but he probably had quite a strong case. This was a man whose genetic background wasn't known until he was actually sentenced to death and on death row, because he'd been adopted as a child. But when he was on death row, he actually discovered that his biological father was also in death row on the same prison. So there was a strong link to sort of a family background in violence. They didn't succeed then either. The judge thought the same as in the Mobley decision, that although the science was advancing, it was still not advanced enough for them to take it into account.
Now, I understand that the appellate panel who were considering whether or not this evidence should be allowed in a court pointed out that a test establishing that someone's pre-programmed to be a merciless killer might not be such a good idea for a defence lawyer to bring into court as a mitigating factor, because people might go, right, okay, you're pre-programmed, let's throw the book at you.
That's right, and in Landrigan's case it didn't really matter because he'd been sentenced to death, so he had nothing to lose. But the court was just warning that for future people trying to argue that their sentences could be reduced, putting forward such an argument which suggests that you will never be rehabilitated and you will go out and offend again because you're programmed to do so, is not something that's going to encourage a court to actually reduce your sentence.
Now, getting back to Mr. Abdulmalek Bayout, was race taken into account in the Italian courtroom?
It doesn't seem to be. When the lawyers argued the genetic link, they referred to one of the studies that had been done on Caucasian males, and Mr. Bayout is not Caucasian.
He's Algerian, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. When his lawyers were actually asked about it afterwards by a scientist, they said that they didn't think that race mattered, so they didn't bring that point to the judge's attention.
What do you make of that assessment that race didn't matter in this case?
I think it's dangerous. If we're going strictly by the scientific studies, they tell us that race does make a difference. There was one study done in the UK where they had separated the males into Caucasian and non-Caucasian. And with the Caucasian group, they replicated the Dunedin study. But with the non-Caucasian group, they got almost the opposite results. So what they concluded is that the MAOA gene interacts differently depending on the racial background of a person.
Now, also, of course, Judge Raynotti in the Trieste Appeal Court, he decided that this was a mitigating factor, but as with the discussion in the Landrigan case, another judge might have said, oh, look, you're beyond the pale, mate. I'm going to lock you up forever. So it really does depend on how a judge kind of interprets this material.
Right, which is why probably some legislative assistance on what we do with this scientific information is going to be very important in the upcoming years.
Do you have a view about how we should approach this fascinating but really problematic area of crime, race, genetics?
I think it has to be approached very carefully. I mean, obviously, if there is something that reduces a person's ability to decide whether to commit a crime, it should be taken into account. And some factors like being abused as a child are already taken into account if someone has committed a violent crime. But in this particular case, if the science doesn't support the argument or the science is not advanced enough, then we do need to be very careful, and we shouldn't be applying it when the scientific basis is not there.
Deborah Wilson from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. Much to ponder there. Now, if you'd like to share your views, you can leave your comments at our website at abc.net.au/rn/law report. There you can also download audio or a transcript or listen to audio online.